Bonjour, bienvenue tout le monde. Euh, J'espère que votre samedi commence bien et merci d'être avec nous. Je vous rappelle que si vous voulez un certificat de participation, il suffit de prendre un screenshot et de l'envoyer à staff@frenchteachers.org. Et ce lien était à la fin de l'invitation à cette session. OK. Et donc, maintenant, je laisse la parole à Anne.
Okay. Bonjour tout le monde. I'm going to be presenting this particular webinar in English because a lot of the terminology about integrated performance assessment has been written in English. But I can assure you that I've been teaching French for over 40 years. I taught in 2 different public high schools in California until 2015 when I retired. And then I now teach at San Jose State University, and I work as the subject area coordinator in world language for future world language teachers. So with that said, I'd like you in the chat to let me know how confident you are feeling about creating integrated performance assessments before Jean and I share what we have put together. So if you can put in the chat box, how confident are you about using integrated performance assessments, just so I can get a sense of the group where you are. Okay, not very, not at all, not very, okay. Never used one. Je n'ai pas de confiance, not at all, okay. Thanks to Madam Shepherd, 50%, moderate. I'm confident using them but not creating them, okay, not at all. Moderately, okay, that's interesting. Alrighty. So since once I share my screen, I'm not going to be able to actually see the chat. So hopefully we'll have time at the end for me to go back to the chat and answer any questions that you have. So if you can put your questions in the chat while Jean and I are presenting, I would greatly appreciate it. Okay. Did you want to say anything about yourself, Jean? I think you're muted, possibly, Jean.
Hi, bonjour. I taught French for 23 years in the suburbs and in the city. I taught all levels 1 through AP, and I recently retired in June.
Okay, so she's joined the retirement group with me. Okay, so we just did this question, responding in the chat box. Okay, so I'm gonna, all right. So what Jean and I have done is that we put together some examples of integrated performance assessments based on the 3 modes of communication. And as you know, the 3 modes of communication are interpretive, and it's interpretive oral and interpretive written, which is when you read, when you listen, and when you read. There's interpersonal communication when 2 students or 3 students are talking with each other, and interpersonal written where students write on blogs, they write each other emails, they're writing to each other or to you. And finally, there's presentational communication. Here's oral presentational communication, and obviously written presentational communication. And probably most teachers are familiar with these forms of communication, but not as much with the other 2, with grading and really making sure that students are introduced to interpretive and interpersonal communication. So here are the 6 modes. When I was teaching, I actually used these 6 categories in my grading scale. So in my gradebook, I had students' grades on interpretive oral, interpretive written, interpersonal oral, interpersonal written, and presentational oral and presentational written, okay? And that was pretty unique for students. They had never been graded like this before. And I told them that because on the AP exam, these are the 6 phases of the AP that they're going to be graded on, it made sense to them, okay? And also, when I started teaching AP language and culture, I actually eliminated giving ordinary tests. I went strictly to integrated performance assessments, and I created them over the first year that I was teaching under the new AP guidelines, which came out in 2011, I believe. And as the more that I used integrated performance assessment, the more that I realized that this was a much fairer way of grading my students' progress and their proficiency in French than just giving them the verb test or giving them the vocabulary test. It was very meaningful assessment for me. And you probably know that ACTFL has also written several books on integrated performance assessment. I highly recommend that you take a look at the books written on integrated performance assessment. They have very, very good resources also. All right, so what we're going to do is share with you a novice level integrated performance assessment, 3 integrated performance assessments for the intermediate level, and 1 for the advanced level. And when you develop an integrated performance assessment, obviously you plan it around a thematic unit. And this is a novice level unit that I developed around the theme of friendship, okay? And with every thematic unit, you also need to develop an essential question, because an essential question guides you throughout your unit. It guides the students' thinking also, and this is what your end focus is all about, okay? So you're starting with the end in mind. And if you think about the term backward design, you're really planning backwards. You're thinking, what is your goal for the end of the unit? What do you want your students to be able to accomplish and know and perform at the end? And then you devise lesson plans along the way to get your students to be able to do these performance assessments. Performance assessments are typically done toward the end of the unit, not necessarily in the very last day, but the students have to have enough vocabulary and structure practice and so forth, obviously, to be able to complete the tasks that you've decided that you want them to do. So typically in a level 1 or 2 French class, there's the theme of friendship, right? So here's an essential question. Why are friends so important to your life? Notice, an essential question doesn't have a typical yes and no answer. It develops students' critical thinking skills, and it makes them think about their friends, what they wanted, why their friends are important to them. And after that, you then create objectives under the 3 modes of communication. So the interpretive communication objectives for this particular unit are that students will be able to analyze authentic texts in which the physical and personality characteristics of friends are described. The other interpretive objective is that students will be able to investigate video and audio clips where students talk about their best friends. So this is the reading with authentic texts, and this is the audio or the visual that they will listen to. The interpersonal communication objective is that they will, in a small group or with a partner, be able to exchange information about their best friends. And the presentational communication objective is that students will be able to write an explanatory text about the importance of friendship. Okay, so you notice there's different objectives, okay, and they are all based on the modes of communication. Obviously, in order to do this unit well, they're going to need to know some descriptive adjectives. They're going to be able to talk about physical traits, and they're going to be able to, have to be able to ask questions about people. Structures, probably they're going to have to know the irregular verbs of to be, to have, être, en avoir, and be able to identify masculine and feminine adjectives, because when they're describing their friends, they're going to have to be able to say, elle est blonde, il est brun, and so forth, and make sure that they know the masculine and feminine adjectives and endings. And the verbs être and avoir, obviously. Okay, so the first video that I wanted to share with you is the interpretive oral communication. And this is a video where children describe their friends, and the students would watch it the first time, and then the second time they would actually respond to comprehension questions. So here's a video that comes from TV5. It's called L'amitié, qu'est-ce que c'est? And it's very cute. I really like it. My students really liked it too. My students really loved this video. And if you've used TV5 before, you'll know that they provide a great number of resources. So here, and what I usually do is I use some of their resources. I take the fiche enseignant and then develop my own questions based on that. But this is what the apprenant video looks like here. Okay, and so you can see they're downloadable from the website. Okay, this one is pretty well done. So why is this an interesting thing for the kids to do? Because there's real French kids talking about their friends. Okay. All right. The next interpretive written communication is that I found an article in a French magazine where students described the importance of their friends. And I asked them to fill in a graphic organizer based on the important ideas in the article. Now, in this case, students are not going to understand everything in the article, and that's okay, because you're asking them to find specific information. So here's the article. Because if you remember, when you read in English, you don't necessarily read to understand everything, and it's okay for kids to read and scan for information. So here's the article. And there's about 8 kids who talk about their best friends. I'm going to scroll down a little bit here because it... Okay, so here's Christophe, 8 ans et demi, okay. And there's Anton, 9 ans. Sayatana, 17 ans. Louise, 15 ans. And these are real French kids talking about their friends, what they do with them, why they like them, and so forth. And so what I did with this particular excerpt is that I asked students actually to fill out a chart where they actually chose 3 of the students in the article. So they just chose 3. And then what they did is that they filled in a graphic organizer where they wrote the name of the friend, his age, what activities this person liked, and then why are these people friends, okay? And most of the students were able to do this with no problem. Okay, so that was the interpretive phase of my unit on friendship. The interpersonal communication phase is that students are put in a group of 4, and each student has a minute to describe an important characteristic of their friends. And then they respond to questions from their group members. Now, obviously, I did this pre-COVID, and I put the students into a group of 4. I'm thinking that probably in a virtual environment, you could put your students into a breakout room and still have them record using Flipgrid, either with a partner or with in their group. I think that would be possible, actually. I honestly haven't tried it virtually, but I think that could work. And then they would send you that MP3 file, okay? So what I do is that I actually give students, you have 1 minute, okay, person number 1, you talk for a minute and describe the important characteristics of the friend. Then I say person number 2, you respond for another minute, person number 3, person number 4, because a minute for a novice level kid is a pretty long amount of time, okay? And they would be doing this without notes. They're just talking about their the characteristics of their friends, okay? And finally, the written presentational communication, because of the fact that they read this online article about their best friend, and they have studied friendship, and they know adjectives and the verbs avoir and être, I asked them to write pretend that they were going to write an online magazine article describing their best friend. And notice this is a fairly guided composition because I tell them exactly what I want them to write in the 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph is the age and physical description of their friend. The second paragraph is where they describe their friend's personality characteristics. And in the third paragraph, they explain why they admire this person. Now remember, they've already seen some authentic resources. They've listened to French kids talking about their friends on the video. They also read a magazine article. They've discussed it in their group. So actually being able to write this short little essay should not be that difficult for them. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about this particular, I can't see the chat, but maybe Jean, if you could answer any questions that anyone has about this before we move on. And this PowerPoint, by the way, is going to be available to everybody with all the links and everything. Okay. Any questions? Okay, and I think the next one is Jean. Yes, la nourriture. I'm going to turn it over to Jean. Jean, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
So this was La Nourriture. I did this with my French 3 students. And first our question was, why is the food we eat part of who we are as individuals as well as a culture? Okay. Interpretive objective, students were able to really understand an authentic article about how to distinguish between food that is actual natural food and good for your health due to what ingredients are in them and those that aren't due to the various additives. In the personal, students were able to discuss with a partner their own personal eating habits and if they are healthy ones. And one thing I had them do, I had them keep a journal for a week and write down everything they ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Okay. Presentational, students were creating visual and they explained the differences between natural and processed foods. All right, and then for vocab, foods, fruits, vegetables, meat, fish, poultry, drinks, tea, water, etc. And verbs are very important as well. Manger, boire, cuisiner, and structures with the imperative and the imperfect. So for interpretive, I gave them an article.
I'll click on the article here.
Okay, thanks. And I found this in the magazine Phosphor, and it's little snippets of information about the differences in cereal that you have at home and what you buy in the store. Talks about frozen food. There's one on bread. And the little snippets of information that they can then go back in and analyze the article.
So here's the second page of the article.
Right.
Les soda light.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to go to the questions that you created.
Perfect. All right, so this is actually the IPA that I gave them. Start out with finding words that they recognize and just writing them. Main idea, what they thought the main idea of the article was, and then supporting details. And with supporting details, there are 8 listed. 5 of them are actually in the article itself as true or not, and they have to go in, read and analyze the section in order to be able to pull out the information they need. Organizational features, 3 words that they have to guess the meaning of depending on the content of the article, versus perspective, comparing their culture with the culture in the article, and then their personal reaction to the article itself. And they loved it. Students who don't normally do well on an exam did extremely well with this type of assessment.
Mm-hmm.
They really should go back, analyze at their own pace, and they really pull out the answers. And they're happy with the results as much as I am. In a personal, they had to create a dialogue. They came to class that morning. I gave them a slip of paper with the information. They had to create a dialogue with a friend and discuss their eating habits and if they were healthy or not. And that was done in class. At this point now, I guess we would have to be small breakout rooms with Zoom.
Yeah.
And then for presentation, they created a visual. They can do it alone with a partner, analyzing the differences between natural and processed foods. And I limit the size on this. If I didn't, everyone would have a 23 by 30 poster. So I keep it at 15 to 20, a mini poster.
Any questions about Jean's IPA on la nourriture? And this is for an intermediate level, right, Jean? When do you use this in your French 3?
French 3 intermediate.
Yeah, okay. All right. Our students nowadays are very, very interested in nature, la nature, or environment. And the essential question that I developed for this particular integrated performance assessment is, what role does nature play in your life? Most of my students in California are very conscious of nature because of the wildfires that we've had. Our school was very environmentally conscious, and most of the students have very, very extreme views about what we need to do to deal with climate change. So here's the essential question: what role does nature play in your life? And I had 3 interpretive objectives for this particular unit. I wanted students to be able to analyze a video clip describing the importance of nature in people's lives. I also love literature, so I had students read several poems describing animals and their characteristics. And I also wanted them to do some research on natural species that are in danger. So there were video clips, there was literature, and there was articles that they read online, okay? For interpersonal communication, I had 2 objectives. I wanted them to work with the partner to exchange their opinions about natural species that are in danger. And on an online forum, I wanted them to share information about an experience that they had in nature that was very meaningful to them. And finally, for presentational communication, I had 2 things that they did. They had a group oral presentation in which they presented an animal that was in danger of extinction. And their written presentation was that I wanted them to write a letter to an international agency about how to save a certain species. Now, for students to be able to do this, they obviously needed to know some vocabulary about animals and plants and endangered species. And they also needed to be able to use the subjunctive sufficiently because they need to be able to express their emotions. Je crains que, j'ai peur que, and then give their opinion. Il est essentiel que, il est nécessaire que, using all of those subjunctive constructions and when people give their personal opinions. So this is a video clip in which students go to a park. This also comes from TV5. And there's a teacher who takes his class to the park and they interview people in a park. And I really love this video. The teacher gives the class instructions and then they go out and interview people. This video is so rich in resources because you have kids interacting with people in a park. It's rich in vocabulary. It touches on protection of animals, nature, pollution. It's a totally rich document and my students really enjoyed watching it. It's medium difficulty, but the vocabulary is there. And these are the questions that came with the video that again were produced by TV5. Okay, here they are. It's 2 pages of questions. And then they have to put the questions in order that are asked by the kids. And then when they watch it a second time, they figure out who said what. And then this is a little dictation where they have to choose the correct words. And then this is more an open-ended question here. Les petits gestes au quotidien. Okay, I think it's really well done and the students really did a good job on this particular activity. In the interpretive written communication, as I said, I love literature, and I found a website that has a collection of poems by Robert Desnos. It's called Chants Fables, and I'm going to click on the website here. The website is called Un jour un poème, and whoops, I think I maybe passed by it here. Here, let's see. Yeah, Chante Fleur, it's called. And, whoops, no, it's not that one, I'm sorry. Here it is, Chante Fable. And these are short little poems written about all of these different animals. Okay, and I'm going to click on a couple just so that you can see what they're like. Here's Le Dromadaire. And here's short little poem. Il fait beau voir Jean de Paris avec ses 12 méharis. Il faut beau voir Jean de Bordeaux avec ses 14 chameaux. Mais j'aime mieux Jean de Madère avec ses 4 dromadaires. Bien loin d'ici, Jean de Madère voyage avec Robert Macaire et leur ami Apollinaire, qui de son temps a su bien faire avec les 4 dromadaires. Okay, that's an example typical of the poems that he writes. Okay, and so I asked students to choose 3, and they then clicked on the poem and read it, and then what they did was actually fill in a graphic organizer. And this is what the graphic organizer looks like. In which they had to name the animal, give a description of the animal, and then their reaction to the poem. Okay. And actually, then I also had them write their own poem in the style of Robert Desnos because they really enjoyed reading these poems a lot. And as I said, I love literature, and this was really my thing. The last thing I had them do was to research animals that are endangered. In this particular activity, once they went to the French research site, they then filled in a chart in which they named 3 animals that are endangered, where they live, why they are in danger, and what can be done to protect them. And this is the research site. It's called Aide-moi. animaux en danger. And then you click on these links to all these different animals that are in danger. Okay. One of the guys in the video mentioned l'ours blanc, I think. L'éléphant d'Asie, le gorille, le castor d'Amérique. Okay, so here they are. All right. And again, they did the same thing. They filled in a graphic organizer in which they had to list an animal that was in danger, as I said before, and where this animal lives, why this animal is in danger, and what we can do to protect this animal. For interpersonal oral communication, I put students in groups of 4, and because they had done individual research, they actually shared their information about their endangered animal. So for about a minute, they described the animal that was in danger, using the subjunctive to express their concerns about the animal. And then in this particular one, students and their other partners in the group had to ask them questions. So they were the experts in their particular animal, and other students in the group had to ask them questions. And then I had them record their conversation using Flipgrid, Audacity, or Google Voice, depending on the platform that I was going to be using. And for the interpersonal written communication, I always put questions on our class blog. We actually used a platform called Schoology when I was at Gunn, and it had a discussion board. And toward the end of the unit that we were studying, I would pose a question that I would ask students to answer. And for this particular one, I asked them to write about an experience that they had in nature that was very moving or important to them. And then they had to use the subjunctive to express their emotions. And students did actually a very, very good job on this particular assignment. So they talked about a camping trip that they went on, or when they went to the beach one time, or when they went to the mountains, or wherever they went, and what it meant to them, and how much they either appreciated it, or an accident that happened to them, or something. And it was very, very, they did a very, very good job. The oral presentation for this particular unit was that I put them into a group of 4, and I asked them to create a PowerPoint where their group would present to the class based on their research of an animal that's in danger in the world of the target culture. So their group decided on the animal that they were going to present, and I made sure that every group, there's a class I think of about 24, so there are about 6 groups. I made sure that each group focused on a different animal. So at this point we had 6 different animals that were in danger, okay? And then they specifically had to do the following things. They had to describe the endangered animal's situation using images. They had to discuss what the local community is doing to protect the animal, if anything, because sometimes local communities are doing a lot to protect animals that are in danger, and sometimes local communities are just letting poachers come and they're not at all protecting the animals. They also had to make several recommendations from the group about how to protect this particular animal or species. And then they had to share their concerns about protection of natural species in general. So if they were in a group of 4, they all contributed to the PowerPoint, and then each person took a particular topic to present to the class. And then the students received a grade. They received an oral grade for their group's presentation, how it was put together, and then individually, each student also received a grade on their part of the presentation. So that way, if students complain and say, oh, I was in a bad group, da, 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 and I would tell them, well, you know, you individually did a really good job, even though your particular group didn't quite meet the mark. Maybe your group got a B, but you got an A. And in general, when I graded students like that, they thought it was pretty fair. The written presentation involved asking students to write a letter to an international agency concerned with the protection of wildlife. And they had to express their worries about a species that's in danger. They had to explain the problem, give some examples and statistics to defend their idea, and make a proposal about how to solve the problem. And this is the French agency that I asked them to write to. It's called the IFAW. The Fonds International pour la Protection des Animaux. Okay, and so they actually wrote to this organization, okay, and had to follow the guidelines that I set out in the letter. Okay, students did a really good job on their letters. And this again was a French 3 assignment. Okay, and now I think we're going to go back to Jean, who put together an assignment on la mode. So go ahead, Jean.
So I love fashion, and when the kids in high school, fashion is with us every day. So I came up with this. I found an article in Prosper again. The central questions: how do the choices of clothing that we wear affect our lives? Can what we wear give the people a real impression of who we really are? And do you feel that it's necessary to dress like a particular star? Why or why not? And then interpretive objective. Students will be able to read and analyze an authentic article that explains how fashion concept comes into being and how that clothing is marketed to them as young people. And then students will be able to see the dialogue with two friends who are shopping for outfits for the winter formal and react to how the salesperson is able to help them.
So this is actually a group of 3 then, right?
Mm-hmm. It is a group of 3.
Okay.
Presentation objective. This was really fun. I created poster boards of the current fashions for the look for the season. They chose the theme, and then they actually made their own designs. And this was really fun. We had a great time with this. Okay. Vocabulary and clothing, colors, types of fabric. I also gave them a lot of supplemental vocabulary for fashion terms. The verbs are there. Structures, imperfect, particle day, adjectives, definitely, comparative, and superlatives. And then we had the article actually was longer than what I used with them, because you want to get the information in snippets so they'll be able to analyze it. So the article was actually 4 pages, and I picked and chose the sections and put it together so they would have just enough information that they would be able to do the activity. So that's the first page. And then the second page is actually 2 different sections that I put together for them. I never made it longer than 1 page double-sided for them. So they would have enough time to analyze and get the information out that they needed.
And here's the activities.
Mm-hmm. And the similar structures for the IPA as before. The vocabulary first, identifying the main idea is next. And then section 3, which is the more challenging, is the supporting details. That's where you have a total of 8 statements or questions. 5 of them are mentioned in the article and 3 of them are not. And just by the change of 1 or 2 words in the vocab, it makes it a challenge for them. Organizational features are there. We're lesson minutes from content, inferences, and for the most part, my answers were in French. Occasionally, there were one or two that they could answer in English or in French, depending. But my students are very used to French all the time. And then, with the interpersonal, they came to class one day. I had the information on a slip of paper. I made the groups because it was much faster than I did the groups. And then I passed out the information. They had 15 to 20 minutes to get themselves figure out what they're going to do, and then they would record it. And then send it to me. And that they can still do now with COVID in the breakout room, make a file and send it to me in Google Classroom. And then last but not least, this was really fun. I gave them a day and a half maybe in class to work on with their partner on their sketches. And then they presented their designs to the class. And it was really fun. We all had, I supplied them with basic figures that they could draw on, with basic shapes of shirts, pants, etc. And there was color, and it was great. We really had a good time with this one. They love fashion, they love food, so they can't go wrong.
Okay, thank you so much, Jean, for sharing your integrated performance assessment on La Mode. All right, now we're going to go to the advanced level. And this is an integrated performance assessment that I did with my AP class on education. And the essential question is, obviously, how do your experiences in school affect your life? And I had 3 interpretive objectives. I wanted students to be able to analyze a film that took place in a school setting. I wanted them to investigate several target culture high school websites so that they could compare what their high school website is like compared to a website in the target culture. And they also needed to examine a literary text based on the theme of education. As I said before, I love literature, and so everything that we do pretty much involves a little bit of literature at some point. The interpersonal communication objectives, there were 2. The first one was that they needed to be exchange ideas about their school experiences with a partner in a group. And they also needed to be able to participate in an online discussion on educational system and an issue involving education. And for presentational communication, I wanted students to be able to participate in a debate on educational issues. And obviously, because this was an AP class, I wanted them to be able to write an essay on an educational issue also. So the vocabulary they would need for this unit was pretty extensive. We studied the educational systems in France, in the United States. Students compared the French cours préparatoire, collège, lycée versus our elementary, middle, and high schools. We talked about the bac and students and the pressure to pass the bac versus students here who do the AP exams. We talked about the curriculum and the fact that students in the lycée actually choose a path, whereas students in high school and in the United States have more of a general education. There was also some specific vocabulary that came up in the authentic texts that students read. Structures, they need to be able to express their opinion, and they also need to be able to form arguments when they actually participated in the debates. Okay, So I actually asked the students, we actually watched the entire film L'Argent de Poche. And I know some of you are familiar with this particular film. I love it. It's a classic. My students really love it. And the interesting thing about this film, if you haven't seen it, is that there's not one plot line, but there are many different little snippets of kids' lives. And so when students when we watched the film over about a course of, I think it was about 3 days or 2.5 days, I actually gave them this particular assignment. I gave them a list of personnages principaux and asked them about what they learned about the main characters in the film. Patrick is the kid whose father is handicapped and he does all the shopping for him. Sylvie is a little girl who with her megaphone yells out to the apartment building, j'ai faim, j'ai faim. Martine is actually François Truffaut's daughter who plays in the film, and she falls in love with Patrick at the end of the movie. Gregory is a little baby who falls out a 9-story building and his mother faints. There's Les Frères de Luca who cut Geoffroy's hair. There's Bruno who thinks he's a great ladies' man. And there's poor Julien Leclou, who's the kid who's abused. There's Laurent, whose father gets very upset when he gets his hair cut by Les Frères de Luca. There's Richard, and then the teacher who's named Monsieur Richer. And so as the students watch the movie, I asked them to write about what they learn about these various characters. And then periodically I asked them to, write comments in their journal and also answer questions on the class blog each day. In general, my students love this movie. There are scenes in the movie that are just spectacular. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend the movie. You can find it on YouTube, I think, and you can buy it from various video services. The second thing I wanted students to be able to do was to do some research. And I asked them to actually research websites of 4 different high schools in the target culture world. And they filled in a graphic organizer in which they compared the classes the students take, the activities that are available to them, the resources, and the school menus. And probably the most fascinating thing to them were the school menus, because my school does not have a menu. We don't even have a cafeteria. We have a snack bar, and it's pretty pathetic. And they were just amazed at the school menus. So I gave them the Lycée Ampère in Lyon. This is what this particular website looks like. Here it is. They notice that there's Réunion Parents. Okay. And the calendrier prévisionnel de l'année de terminale. Okay. And then here's the menu where they went through the different things that they needed to learn about the Lycée Ampère. Whoops, I need to go back here. Then we went to Quebec. And here's the Collège de Montréal. And again, they clicked on the links, learned about the classes that are offered, and so forth. And then I had them go to Lycée de Bellevue in Martinique. Okay. Notice here's the Baccalauréat Général et Technologique. Okay. The notices for the parents and the students. And finally, I had them go to Dakar, to the Lycée Mermoz. You can pay online. So it's obviously a private school. Okay. Here's what the campus looks like. Okay. All right, and then they actually were able to click on primaire, secondaire, scolarité, okay, and find out all the information that they needed. And so then what I did was I asked them to compare these 4 schools by filling in a graphic organizer. There they are. There are the schools listed, and then Gun High School would be here. All right, and they analyzed the courses that were offered, the activities the students participated in, the resources that the schools provided, and the menus. And they learned a lot, actually, about what school is like in 4 different countries. And they really enjoyed this assignment. They said, Madam Jensen, this was really interesting. I didn't realize that there's so much difference, actually, and also similarities between what high school is like for American kids and what it's like in France, in Quebec, in Martinique, and in Senegal. And finally, I asked students to read a poem that I love. I love the poetry of Jacques Prévert. I'm sure you guys do too. And I've done a number of different poems by him, but this particular one is called Page d'écriture. And the poem is here. 2 et 2, 4, 4, 4, 8, 8 et 8 font 16. And then there's this very stern teacher who says, répétez. And the students have to repeat again, 2 et 2, 4, 4, 4, 8, 8 et 8 font 16, mais voilà l'oiseau lyre qui passe dans le ciel. So in the poem, there's a student who has a great imagination and sees a bird that comes in the sky and calls the bird and says, save me, sauve-moi, joue avec moi, oiseau. And then the bird actually comes into the classroom, okay? And then the maître says, répétez. And the kid starts playing with the bird, okay? And what happens is that pretty soon the whole classroom disappears and all of the walls fall down and everybody, the kids dance and the classroom becomes, the glass becomes sand and the ink becomes water, the desks become trees, and the whole class, the whole scene changes. And my students love this poem. And I found online a reenaction of this poem, which is absolutely adorable. And I'm going to play it for you now. It's Yves Montand. Yves Montand actually sings the poem also. You can find a rendition of him singing the poem also online. But my students really enjoyed watching this. So I found, I actually had some comprehension questions that I developed for my students. And I also found some questions online, which I think are very good. So here is the link to the online questions. They were developed, I'm not sure who developed these, but here's the objectives. And there's les verbes du poème, expression du poème, piste de correction, les 2 univers du poème. And they're pretty well done, actually. Okay. The whole point of this poem is that education kills the imagination, right? Because that was a big theme of Jacques Prévert, that our current educational system kills imagination, and there's repressive teachers and students languish their days away, you know, sort of having their imagination stifled. And he, you know, in his poetry, he doesn't use punctuation. He makes fun of institutions. And so students, obviously in high school, love this poem because it makes fun of everything that they hate about going to school. And we had a great discussion about this poem, actually. Okay, so In the interpersonal communication phase of this, I asked students in their group of 4 to talk about positive and negative experiences that they've had at school. And this was a chance for them to explain, oh, this teacher is really unfair to me, or I really messed up in my history class, and so they actually talked about their experiences in high school, pros and cons. Some of the kids that had very positive experiences all the way through high school, some of the kids that had pretty negative experiences and were very forthright about their experiences. Some of them, because our class is very diverse, kids come from all backgrounds, had experienced racism by certain teachers and by certain classmates, and so they talked about that. And actually, they had really, really salient discussions about various aspects of when they were growing up. And they could talk about elementary school, middle school, or their current experiences in high school. It was fairly wide open. And also they had to, and then the group, once they explained for a minute or two their personal experiences, people in the group had to ask them questions about how this experience affected them. Did you get over this experience? Has it affected you dramatically? You know, and so they were able to talk about, you know, their positive and negative experiences going through the academic system. On the interpersonal written communication, I asked them to react to the end of the movie in L'Argent de Poche. There's 2 ending scenes in the movie that are very meaningful. And for those of you who know the film, know that Julien Lecroux, who's abused by his mother and grandmother, they are arrested at the end of the movie, and Julien is taken away by social services. And all the kids find out about this, and they come back to class, and Monsieur Richet actually has a very, very interesting discussion with the class about what happened to Julien Lecroux. And I'm going to play this scene because it's very moving, and then tell you, and then what I asked my students to do. I love this last scene. It's incredible because Monsieur Richet says so many things about education, la loi de recompensation, and when he says la vie est dure, mais elle est belle, it's just such an important, poignant moment, I think. And he says this to kids who are not that old, but they're sitting there mesmerized by this particular speech. And so I took the quote, la vie est dure, mais elle est belle, and I asked students to react on the class blog, or actually on our discussion board, about their reaction to this particular scene. And most of the students wrote incredible commentaries on the movie, on their philosophy of life, and responded back to each other. They really appreciated this particular scene in the movie. So if you get a chance to share this movie with your students, I highly recommend it. Finally, what I asked students to do is that there was a class of about 24, and I decided that after, you know, viewing the various authentic texts that we had read on education, and they'd studied education and so forth, that I wanted them to be able to debate topics that affect their personal lives. And there were 6 groups, and there were 4 kids in each group. And each group was responsible to, 2 people had to be for the topic and 2 people had to be against the topic. And the topics were: grades should be eliminated, girls and boys should go to separate schools, to be successful in school, you have to cheat, traditional or direct classroom instruction is better than project-based learning, all students should be required to learn a foreign language, and homework should be eliminated. These were the 6 topics that they needed to prepare for the debate. So I gave them about a half a day in class to work with their group to prepare their arguments. And then the next day in class, each group had about 10 minutes to present the pros and cons of their particular question. Now, the thing about a debate is that students can initially prepare what they want to say. And I told them that they could have note cards to help them, but they couldn't actually read to the class. The rest of the class took notes on each of the 6 debate topics, okay? And then, so if, for example, if the students had the topic grades should be eliminated, there was one person who said, yes, grades should be eliminated. Another person said, no, grades should not be eliminated, given the reasons why. Another person said, yes, grades should be eliminated. Another person said, no, grades should not be eliminated. And they had to give their arguments. But as the arguments progressed, what students prepared, they weren't necessarily expecting, because they had to think on the spot and respond spontaneously to what the other person said. And that's the interesting part about them debating, because you don't know where the topic is going to lead to. And so they needed enough vocabulary to be able to say, mais oui, mais si, mais, and so I gave them enough vocabulary so that they could defend their arguments, and, you know, words like je pense que, à mon avis, things like that, so that they could actually have the vocabulary to defend their arguments. This question was particularly interesting, particularly in light of, you know, students whose parents paid for them to get into college. Gunn High School, where I taught, was a very, very high-powered academic school, and everybody said they cheated at one point, okay? And when I told them that, actually, I went to high school and I never cheated, they did not believe me. They could not believe that I had gone through high school and never cheated. And I said, I never cheated. I'm sorry. I didn't ever cheat. And they said, oh, Madame Jansen, you must have cheated once. I said, no, actually, I never cheated. Je n'ai jamais triché. And they found that just astounding, because they all cheated at some point. That was kind of disappointing to me, but very revelatory about what things are like in the intensive academic environment that we actually teach in today. And it's very, very cutthroat for the poor kids, you know, who are trying to get into the best schools, and they're trying to do their best. They have tons of pressure from their parents, from the community. So that was an interesting argument that they had. And also eliminating homework was an interesting one. Because there were some students who really thought homework was totally stupid and that they never really wanted to do it and it shouldn't be done. And other students really believed that homework was helpful. They just didn't like busy work. And so they had an interesting conversation about the value of when it's appropriate and when it's not. And yeah, foreign language was another one. Most of my students thought that foreign language should be required. They were sort of mixed on traditional or classroom instruction versus direct versus project-based learning. That was about half and half. This one, girls and boys should go to separate schools. I had some students who actually had gone to private girls' schools or boys' schools, and they were very adamant that they thought it was great to go to a separate schools, but most of the kids thought it was better to go to a school that was mixed, because you remember Monsieur Richet at the end of the film says, l'année prochaine, l'école sera mixte, and the boys go, oh, wow, you know, so they're very excited about having une école mixte. And obviously eliminating grades was a big, interesting topic for them, because as you know, students are motivated by grades. And to say you're not going to be graded on this, a lot of times students won't do the assignment if they don't think it's going to be graded, or if it won't, quote, count. You know, and so learning for learning's sake and learning for pleasure and learning because you want to enrich yourself is something that's kind of gone out of our system altogether. So these are really interesting topics that the students debated. And once we had discussed all of the topics on that particular day, I told the students that they needed to actually write an in-class, the following day they were going to write an in-class essay based on the debate. And the in-class essay could be based on their own topic that they had researched, or one of the other topics that they had heard that it was more interesting to them. So if they had done, we should eliminate grades, but they really wanted to talk about eliminating homework, they could do that. And these are the instructions for the debate that I put together, or for the essay, I'm sorry. So these are the instructions for the debate. Okay, and these were the instructions for the debate. And this was the vocabulary I gave to them to sort of help them out. This isn't moving. Yeah, here it is. Okay. And this was the rubric that I used to grade their debate. And this was the composition that then I asked them to write with some suggestions. With an introduction, the main body of the composition, it's a 5-paragraph essay, and then the conclusion to help them out a little bit. Okay. Now on the next slide, what I've done is that I've put together some rubrics that you're welcome to use if you are looking for rubrics about how are you going to grade the interpretive mode? How are you going to grade the interpersonal, oral, and written mode? How are you going to grade the presentational mode? For example, here's the interpretive mode rubrics. And they are based on novice, intermediate, and advanced levels based on the ACTFL scale. So here's the novice interpretive rubric, intermediate, and advanced interpretive rubric. And then here's the interpersonal oral. Some of them are in chart form and some of them are more in, yeah, here's ACTFL novice level. I tend to use letter grades, but you can fill in this with points. A is 4, B is 3, C is 2, D is 1, if you want to do it that way. So there's novice, here's intermediate, interpersonal oral, intermediate level, and intermediate high level, and the advanced level. So those rubrics are there for your use also. I tend to use the same rubrics pretty much all the time. I have them on my computer and I vary them slightly, you know, for each assignment. But in general, once you have a rubric down, you don't need to alter it that much, actually. For presentational speaking rubrics, as I said before, I give 1 grade to the group if it's a group presentation for the content, and that's a separate grade. And then each student who presents, I grade them on their content, their vocabulary, their language control, their pronunciation, and their fluency. Okay. And then when I'm grading a written composition or project of some kind, I grade them on 4 things. I grade them on the content again, the vocabulary, their language control, and the mechanics, spelling, things like that. Okay. And as I said, this PowerPoint is going to be available at the end of the session. If you want to contact me or Jean, here is our contact information. And I'm going to go out of my screen share and look at questions that possibly came up in the chat. So just a second here.
And there was one person who asked about the debate, how the topics were assigned and how you divided the students into groups. Was it random or?
It was fairly random, yes. I actually, there was some, yeah, what I did is I just went around and assigned your group 1, you have this topic, your group 2, you have this topic. And it was, yeah, it was not, they didn't choose their topic. They just were assigned their topic actually. Okay, and I'm going to close out this here.
And did the rest of the class participate in the, respond to what was debated?
Yeah,
or was it just the?
Yeah, so then once the students had presented, the rest of the class was taking notes, and they actually had it, there was a chance, I told the students, you have to ask at least 1 intelligent question during this debate. And so then I kept track of who in the class asked the debate presenters questions. And again, this was graded on interpersonal communication because then they had to answer on the spot from questions from their classmates. And then they took notes on, you know, the other 5 groups. And so that way they had in their journals. And so that way they had sort of a list of in the end of which debate topic they were going to put into an essay. The other question is, you have 4 criteria. Each criteria is equal for me. I don't say this is worth more. Every criteria is weighted the same for me.
Mhm. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, there's a push in my school to eliminate homework. Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Excusez-moi, Anne, that was me, Katia from California.
Yeah.
First of all, merci to you and to Jean and to all the AATF admin for providing all these awesome webinars.
Thank you.
So about the homework during this pandemic, what do you think about it? It's like on one hand, we want to push the rigor, and on the other hand, you know, those kids are depressed. They're going through so much.
I
The
know.
internet sometimes it's lagging. They don't have hotspots.
Yeah.
What should we do?
I think you have to be really understanding right now, because we're not in normal times. I have a lot of student teachers right now, 11 of them, who are out there trying to teach, and they are in very difficult circumstances with students who don't have hotspots, their Wi-Fi breaks down. It's not a normal time, and I really think we need to just understand that and change our homework guidelines quite a bit. I mean, that's what I would do if I were, teaching at the high school level. And I've told my student teachers, you need to really be understanding for the poor kids who are spending 6 hours a day online, and maybe they don't want to do the homework. And so creating, integrated performance assessments that are interesting and fun for students rather than drill and kill activities, I think is the way to go, actually, because students really respond to these kinds of assessments that Jean and I put together. You notice they're not tests at all. They're things that students do in the target language. Anything else that you have questions on? Will you talk about the teaching of vocab, verb tests, and said that go on before the IPA, between the steps of the IPA? Yes, I used Quizlet a lot for students to practice vocabulary. I used Conjugamus, the verb conjugation, where students had to go, online and practice verb conjugating. So obviously I did some drill and kill activities so that students would have enough background before they actually completed the IPAs. And did vocabulary quizzes and things like that, obviously, but those were not the main focus of my lessons. And I really wanted to know what students were able to do with the content that I had given them. So typically we would do an IPA after studying a particular unit for about 2 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. And they'd done enough preparation so that they could actually do the IPA and do it well, actually. Pear Deck, yes, is a really good tool to get students engaged. Yeah.
Someone asked how many IPAs is it reasonable to do during a semester or a year?
Well, I did an interpretive interpersonal IPA after each unit that I taught. And typically in AP, I did about 5 units a semester. And for each of the units, I always gave an interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational assessment. But for lower levels, I would think that most textbooks are set up so that you do 5 or 6 units per semester, 3 weeks on a chapter. So that means that you would want to do something at the end of each chapter or unit, I would say. Anything else that you have questions on? Will you address how you handle evaluation of the Flipgrid recordings? Is it just to keep the kids accountable speaking French? Well, when the kids do Flipgrid, then it's a recording, and then I use my interpersonal rubric to actually evaluate their progress. They know they are being graded when they do this. Okay, so they take it very seriously because I know I'm going to listen to every recording, and they are going to get a grade on their interpersonal communication, because otherwise they don't talk. It's unfortunate, but they really won't talk to each other unless they think they're being graded. So that's very, very important for me. Anything else? I have a few students who show up in Zoom but never turn in anything. I know that happens. Oh yeah, the Éducation Nationale by Grand Corps Malade. That's a really neat song. I love Grand Corps Malade. How did you find the different high schools? I just started Googling, you know, lycée en France, and found a number of websites. And so usually they can find them fairly easily, actually. Some of my students' browsers automatically translate texts into English when they visit international website. Oh, okay. I didn't even realize that. Interesting. Gregory fait boom. Yes, there's that famous line. There's that famous scene in in L'Argent de Poche where he falls out of the 9-story apartment building and says, "Gregory a fait boom." Okay. And the Ohio Department of Education has excellent rubrics on the 6 months. I actually used some of these when I developed my own. So that's a really good website, actually. Contre, I think, is a textbook. Yeah, on fashion. And they have a unit on fashion. And there's some other resources on Enseigner TV5 Monde. Okay, that was the video. Actually, the fiches apprenants are free. And I actually found this online. You don't need a subscription to TV5 to have access to their materials. You can just go online and find them. You don't need to subscribe to TV5, actually. And a list of essential questions. That's a good Google Doc. Huh. Yes, chameau and dromadaire are two different animals. This is true. Yeah. I think that on TV5, on the videos that I showed you, I don't know if you can get rid of the subtitles. I'd have to check on that. And for the essential question, you know, you want to develop an essential question that really develops their critical thinking skills and makes them think outside of the box. There's never a right or wrong answer to an essential question. It's a profound question. And I keep the essential question available on all the PowerPoints that I show the students so that they are always focusing on this essential question in terms of doing the activities that we're doing for the rest of the unit. And then oftentimes I ask them to respond to a question related to the essential question on our class blog or discussion board. So all of these links, as I said, are in our PowerPoint. Does anybody else have any questions before? I know we finished a little bit early, but it's a Saturday, and I know you have a lot of stuff, lots of stuff for you guys to do. So any other questions? Petit Nicolas, okay. Anything else that you wanted to say, Jean, before we finish?
No.
Thanks much, everybody. Thanks, Jane, for organizing this. You can contact us. Our information was on the website, on the PowerPoint, and it'll be available. It's
already there.
It's already there. Okay.
Mhm.
All
And we'll
right.
put the chat up too. I'll share it with Jean and Ann and give them a chance to respond to any questions that were missed.
Okay.
And then
Okay.
we'll post it. And the video should be up sometime next week.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. I hope this helped you think about how to develop interpersonal or integrated performance assessments. Contact us if you have any questions, and I will be in touch. Okay. Thank you much. Bye-bye. Take care.
Ciao.
Bye. Bye.